Highway of Tears. All of this began in 1969. On a road trip with her family, 26-year-old Gloria Moody was spending precious time with her brother and her two small children. She was confirmed to be present at the Ranch Hotel Bar in Williams Lake, British Columbia, Canada, on October 25th evening. That night, she and her brother went out to bars, and her brother claims that when he left the third place, he thought Gloria was following him. However, two hunters discovered Gloria's body one day later on October 26th, 10 kilometers from Williams Lake on a cow road. After her clothes were taken off, it became clear to the investigators that she had suffered from physical and sexual abuse. She bled out from the wounds she received. Even though there were several people who were of interest, nobody was ever arrested. In 1998, a police official informed the relatives that, although a cold case of homicide is never closed, all leads had been exhausted and the three primary suspects were now dead. Then, in July 1970, over a year later, 18-year-old Micheline Paré suffered a same fate. Highway 29 is where we last saw her. She was traveling the area on a hitchhike and was from Quebec. She was picked up and left off close to Tompkins Ranch by two women. August 1970 saw the discovery of her body. She had also been sexually molested and fatally beaten with a blunt object. Gail Weiss, a 19-year-old hitchhiker from Clearwater to Kamloops, vanished in October 1973. On Highway 5, south of Clearwater, her body was discovered in a ditch. Pamela Darlington, 19, also disappeared from Kamloops a month later while hitchhiking to a nearby club. Next day, her body was discovered. Monica Ignis, a 14-year-old, was reportedly headed home from school in Thornhill, British Columbia on December 13, 1974. 4 months later, her body was discovered in a densely forested area to the east of Terrence. It had been a strangulation. Colleen McMillan, 16, was last seen hitchhiking to a friend's house nearby in August of the same year after she was last seen leaving her Loch Lacatch home. 46 kilometers to the south of her last known location, her body was discovered. The youngest victim of the Highway of Tears, Monica Jack, was only 12 years old when she was last seen riding her bicycle in May 1978. Monica's mother offered to drive her the remaining distance when she saw her riding her bike home from shopping, but Monica preferred to complete the ride on her own. Later on, her bike was discovered, but she was nowhere to be seen. Her whereabouts were unknown for 17 years. About 20 kilometers from the location where Monica's bike was first discovered, forestry workers discovered Monica's bones in a ravine off a logging road in 1995. Her identification was verified by DNA testing and dental records. She had also suffered from sexual assault and died from strangulation. Maureen Mosey, then 33, was last seen hitchhiking from Salmon Arms to Kamloops on May 8, 1981. A woman walking her dog along a road approximately 16 kilometers east of Kamloops discovered her body the following day. She had suffered a serious beating. Witnesses spotted her getting into a car with a bearded man in his late 20s or early 30s who had black or brown hair. On May 3, 1983, Shelley Ann Basso, then 16 years old, vanished from Hinton, Alberta. According to police reports, she was last observed on Highway 16 at approximately 8:30 p.m. Her body was never found, however, a few days after her first disappearance. Personal belongings like her clothes and blood droplets that matched her blood type were discovered close to the Athabasca River. The 24-year-old Alberta Williams body was discovered on September 25, 1989, close to the Thai Overpass, approximately 37 kilometers east of Prince Rupert, British Columbia. She has also experienced sexual assault and strangulation. The 15-year-old Cecilia Ann Nicole vanished that same year. The family was horrified by the terrible coincidence that her 15-year-old cousin Delphine Nicole vanished mysteriously the year before she went missing. Both are still absent as of right now. Ramona Wilson was traveling by hitchhike to her friend's house in Smithers, British Columbia on June 11, 1994. April 1995 saw the discovery of her remains next to Highway 16, not far from Smithers Airport. In July of the same year, 15-year-old Roxanne Thyara vanished from Prince George. She informed a buddy that she was going out with a client while working as a prostitute. After walking around a building's corner, she vanished from sight. Her body was discovered close to Highway 16 West by an elementary school. She had died from a stabbing. Lona Derrick, then 19 years old, vanished in October of 1995. She was never located. Her last known location was a gas station close to Terrence. When Nicole Hoare vanished on June 21, 2002, she was 25 years old. Nicole, who was last seen at a service station on 5952 Gauthier Road, west of Prince George, is originally from Red Deer, Alberta. She was never located. On September 21, 2005, Tamara Chipman, then 22 years old, vanished, leaving behind a toddler. In Prince Rupert, British Columbia, she was last spotted hitchhiking on Highway 16 close to an industrial park. At the tender age of 14, Aliyah Sarah Gogger was a student at DP. When she vanished, she was a student at Todd Secondary School in Prince George, British Columbia. Her relatives last saw her on February 2, 2006. She was last seen reportedly getting into a black van. 8 days later, her body was discovered in a ditch next to Highway 16, to the east of Prince George. In order to attend a party, 20-year-old Madison Scott and his friend Jordy Beldew traveled to Hogsback Lake, which is close to Vanderhoof, British Columbia, on May 28, 2011. Madison had intended to spend the night camping with her friend Jordy following the party, but at around midnight a fight broke out between a couple of the males, and her friend Jordy, who was already intoxicated and hurt from the fight, decided to leave the party with her new boyfriend. Instead of going home, Madison made the decision to spend the night in a tent by her truck. Partygoers last saw her at around 3 in the morning. Madison's parents went looking for her at the lake 2 days later when she still hadn't come home. The flattened tent was still next to her pickup when they discovered it. Nothing turned up when the tent was searched, but Madison's pocketbook was discovered in the truck. Her cell phone and car keys were nowhere to be found. There was no indication of a struggle, according to the police, who also believe foul play. Madison vanished in the vicinity of Highway 16. These are only a few of the numerous women who have been murdered or who have vanished from sight along the complex Highway of Tears. In the majority of these cases, there is a dearth of information online concerning the victims. The Highway of Tears is bordered by 23 First Nations communities and other municipalities. Many residents in these towns struggle to make ends meet and get minimal support. The majority of them are unable to pay for a car to commute to job or school. The majority of the population lacks access to public transit. Public transit is available in certain places, although it is typically restricted to a single bus that operates on a set timetable. People who live here must therefore find alternative means of transportation if they miss the bus or if their job schedule conflicts with the bus schedule. Hitchhiking enters the picture at this point. Hitchhiking on the Highway of Tears is the only alternative available to a large number of people, particularly women. Because of this, predators can easily prey on them. Women are aware of the risks involved in hitchhiking and are aware of the numerous warning signs placed along the roadway, but they don't have many options for getting about. Officially, the Highway of Tears is linked to 18 cases by the Royal Canadian Mounted Police. However, the Indigenous community places that number closer to 50. Over 50% of the women who have gone missing or been killed on this route are First Nations or Indigenous people from Canada. British Columbia has the most number of unsolved Indigenous women's and girls' killings in Canada, according to Human Rights Watch, an international non-governmental organization that advocates for and conducts research on human rights. But British Columbia is not the only place experiencing this issue. According to a 2015 investigation of missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls, there have probably been more than 1,200 murdered and unaccounted for Indigenous women in Canada. Although they make up only 4% of Canada's population, 16% of murdered women are Indigenous women. There is a similar pattern of disproportionate violence against Indigenous women in the killings and disappearances that occur along the Highway of Tears. Over the years, there have been other disappearances on Highway 16, but it wasn't until a white lady, Nicole Hoare, 25, vanished in June 2002 that huge search parties set out to find her, and the matter was covered by the media. But the Aboriginal woman who disappeared earlier received a fraction of the attention. Numerous victims were wrongly classified by the local police as drug or prostitution addicts. Furthermore, many involved in the prosecutions have acknowledged erasing any correspondence pertaining to the Highway of Tears, which has left the Native American community suspicious and doubtful about their prospects of receiving justice. Project Ipana was established by the Royal Canadian Mounted Police in 2005 in order to look into the Highway of Tears murders. By 2007, 9 more cases had been found, bringing the total number of missing or deceased women to 18. In 2012, the project succeeded in resolving the 1974 disappearance case of 16-year-old Colin McMillan. After DNA evidence was re-examined, Bobby Jack Fowler, an American serial murderer, was found to have been involved in her death. The RCMP was unaware of Bobby despite his lengthy criminal history in the United States. It was discovered that Bobby Jack Fowler frequently traveled on Highway 16 while working for a roofing company in Prince George in 1974. The official Highway of Tears victim list lists 2 further slain women, Pamela Darlington and Gail Ways, whose murders the RCMP felt he may have also been responsible for after additional research. But Fowler had passed away in jail in 2006. In Oregon, he was found guilty of 2 distinct double killings. 2 more suspects were named in connection with a number of the other fatalities and disappearances. The murder of Lauren Leslie, who was discovered dead in 2010 beside the Highway of Tears, was found to have been committed by Cody Luchbikoff in 2014. He was also connected by the police to 3 other people who vanished along the Highway of Tears in 2010 and 2009. At the time of the crimes, he was just 19 or 20 years old. Lechbokov received a life sentence without the possibility of release for 25 years. In 2014, Monica Jack, who vanished in 1978, and Catherine Mary Herbert, an 11-year-old girl who has also been suggested as a victim of the Highway of Tears killings, were both allegedly killed by Gary Taylor Handlin, another suspect. He was once a suspect according to the police, but not enough evidence was available to file charges against him. Gary was convicted of rape in 1979 and given an 18-year sentence. However, his sentence was eventually reduced, allowing him to serve just 12 years. In early 2019, a jury found him guilty and sentenced him to life in prison. As a result, the murder of Monica Jack is now the first case in Project Ipana to be concluded with formal judicial procedures and punishment. While Ipana continues to look into the cases that remain unresolved, no new cases have been added since 2007. Even as recently as 2018, the ladies on the Highway of Tears have persisted in going missing. Over the past 50 years, Highway 16 is said to have been the target of several serial killers, and it's probable that the majority of these murders will go unsolved. Moving on to the next case. Graham Frederick Young. Graham Frederick Young was born in September 1947 in Middlesex, England, and developed an early fascination with poisons. His experiments on others around him soon gave rise to a malevolent fascination in him. However, it took a while before Graham was apprehended and permanently imprisoned. Graham started poisoning his family in 1961 in order to research the impact the poisons had on the human body. He began with his 37-year-old stepmother, Molly, who experienced unexplainable diarrhea, vomiting, and stomach aches. Fred, his 44-year-old father, quickly went in her direction. At last, Winifred, Graham's sister, and a few of his pals started to experience the consequences. Graham was sick too, though not as badly. Whether this was a deliberate action or an accident is unknown. Graham brought Winifred tea later in November 1961, but she only swallowed a single mouthful before spitting it out because it felt sour. She was rushed to the hospital after experiencing hallucinations during her morning commute, when it was determined that she had been exposed to deadly nightshade or Atropa belladonna, a plant that, when consumed, is very toxic. Graham replied by accusing his sister of combining her shampoos in the teacups when Fred confronted him about it. Although there was nothing suspicious in his son's bedroom, Fred cautioned him to exercise more caution. Molly Young passed away from poisoning on April 21, 1962, just 6 months later. Fred was rushed to the hospital and informed that he would have perished from one more dose of poison. Following this change of events, Graham's science teacher discovered poison bottles in his desk and informed the principal, which made Graham's aunt suspicious of him as well. On May 23, 1962, Graham was taken into custody and referred to a psychiatrist. He admitted to trying to kill Winifred, Fred, and one of his buddies. Since Molly had been cremated at Graham's insistence and had suffered a prolapse of her spinal bone in a car accident, her death was not thought to be suspicious. Moreover, authorities were unable to determine the cause of death. The 15-year-old was diagnosed with schizophrenia and personality disorder after being placed under detention at Broadmoor Hospital under the Mental Health Act. Subsequent examination of Graham's demeanor and actions revealed that he might have also fallen onto the autistic spectrum. Graham told the hospital psychiatrist in 1970 that he was no longer fixated on violence and poison. Subtly, nevertheless, he was poring over medical texts and conducting experiments on both staff and prisoners. His demise was brought on by his inquiries. Graham was freed in February 1971, a year later, having apparently healed completely. He obtained employment at a laboratory where his prior conviction was unknown, and his probation officer never followed up with him. His foreman fell ill and passed away not long after the now 24-year-old began working there. His workplace was inundated with illness, which was misdiagnosed as a virus. A few of his co-workers even needed to be admitted to the hospital. Graham Young's well-known tea appeared to be making a comeback. It's estimated that 7 people were poisoned, but not fatally, and he left the position without delay when the new foreman fell ill. The fourth and last victim of Graham was one of his co-workers. When Graham suspiciously asked the corporate doctor if thallium had been taken into account, he revealed to one of his co-workers that he enjoyed studying chemicals. Alarmed, Graham's co-workers reported this information to the police, which resulted in his second arrest on November 21, 1971. Authorities discovered a number of poisons in his house and on his person, along with a notebook recording the dosages, side effects, and whether he had allowed someone to live or die. Graham entered a not guilty plea and maintained that the diary was just a work of fiction, despite the overwhelming evidence pointing to his culpability. This did not sit well with the jury that found him guilty, and he received a life sentence. Graham became friends with the notorious Brady when he was incarcerated. Brady was a Scottish serial killer and one half of the group responsible for the Moors murders. Their infatuation with Hitler and the Nazis was common. Graham passed away from a heart attack in August 1990, 1 month shy of turning 43. He is referred to as the teacup poisoner and the Sentinel Burns poisoner. A 16-year-old Japanese schoolgirl was detained in November 2005 for thallium poisoning her mother, which was sparked by Graham Young's unsettling actions. She said she had seen the 1995 black comedy The Young Poisoner's Handbook about Graham's life and was enthralled with him. The way Graham kept a diary, she kept an internet blog. There are no current updates available, although in 2005 the girl's mother was reportedly in a coma. Moving on to the next case. Debbie Lynn Randall. Sadly, on January 13, 1972, 9-year-old Debbie Lynn Randall, a young student in Marietta, Georgia's 3rd grade, disappeared while returning home from a local laundromat. Thousands of people participated in the enormous uprising that followed her disappearance, but it ended tragically. Debbie was brutally attacked and strangled, and her body was recovered 16 days later on January 29, 1972. 2023 saw a breakthrough in this case, which had been unsolved for decades. Marietta, Georgia, a major city in Cobb County and a component of the Atlanta metropolitan region, has a population of approximately 61,000. Its origins can be traced back to the Cherokee settlement of Big Shandy, who were among the first people to settle in what is now Kennesaw. Situated at the heart of the city, the historic Marietta Square serves as a testament to the city's remarkable history. Marietta blends old-world beauty with modern suburban life. It is well known for its enormous chicken structure, which has been a symbol since 1963. It is conveniently located between Kennesaw and Smyrna, and it is well served by important thoroughfares such as U.S. Route 41, State Route 3, and Interstate 75. The city is not impervious to crime despite its many good aspects, as demonstrated by the recent closure of the Debbie Lynn Randall cold case in 2023. On August 21, 1962, Debbie Lynn Randall was born in the quiet Georgian town of Marietta, to the joy of her parents, John Randall and Joanna DeWheeler Randall. When Debbie was a child in 1972, she was enrolled in Pine Forest Elementary School's 3rd grade. She quickly became popular among her friends at school and in the community thanks to her gentle and caring nature. Debbie was well liked and well known for her generosity. The warmth and caring that were often evident in Debbie's house demonstrated her endearing personality. Regular gifts of dolls were given to her by guests as a token of their admiration for her. These dolls were more than simply toys. They were a symbol of the community's love for her. At home, Debbie had a special bond with her older brother, Melvin Randall. As siblings, they had a close-knit and caring relationship. Melvin, Debbie's older brother, is protective and kind, and he always tries to fulfill her wants. This tie exemplified the close-knit dynamics within their family. Debbie's life was tragically cut short, leaving her family and community in deep grief. Debbie's life was full of hopes and youthful aspirations. The Randall family in Marietta appeared to be having a typical evening on January 13, 1972. Little Debbie was playing with her mother Joanita while her brother Melvin was ill and in bed. As John Debbie's father came back, Joanita was in the kitchen preparing dinner. The night continued as usual. That evening, as she regularly did, Debbie begged permission to play at the local playground. It's in a well-known and safe region just a short stroll from their home. Debbie gladly consented, telling Juanita she would be back before supper to get some laundry powder from the laundromat across the street. Debbie would usually walk to the playground after school for 5 minutes, where she would play for an hour. Joanna waited for her to return in around 1.5 hours, but as time passed and Debbie failed to return, worry grew. Debbie never arrived late without informing her or missed her curfew. As the evening wore on and Debbie remained elusive, Joanna's concern mounted. When Jod got home at 9:45 p.m., they still had no idea where Debbie had gone missing. Their worry became to panic when they realized that this was nothing like Debbie. Despite feeling under the weather, Melvin decided to join the search. The family took swift action. The area, which was usually the hub of activity, was suddenly the subject of growing anxiety. After Debbie had left the house earlier, Melvin went about asking others if they had seen her, but no one had any further information on her. When Jiminata and John noticed the playground was deserted, they ran to the closed laundromat. The streets were empty, and every minute felt heavier because of their daughter's passing. When they discovered a box of washing powder on the road near their home, their worries were increased, a clear indication that something wasn't right. Jornita decided to phone the police, driven by maternal instinct and refusing to cry. Even yet, they had to overcome the formal barrier that Debbie had disappeared in less than a day, preventing them from then on from officially reporting her missing. Despite this, the police told them that they would still do everything in their power to locate Debbie. The entire community helped and supported the Randall family during their hunt. In the days that followed, over 4,000 volunteers, among them Debbie's brother Melvin, ransacked the city. Flyers with Debbie's photo and a plea for her safe return were all over the streets. The local police pursued every lead with the same level of dedication. The laundromat confirmed that Debbie had picked up the washing powder, but it was still unclear what had happened to her in the brief period between her visit and her disappearance. Despite questioning Debbie's close friends in the neighborhood, none of them were able to provide any information regarding her whereabouts. Knowing that hope would soon run out, the Randall family and the community clung on to it as the days dragged into weeks. After 16 excruciating days, on January 29, 1972, a group of Southern Tech students who had been diligently assisting the authorities made an excruciating discovery. Debbie's body was found in a forested location near Johnson Ferry Road. Her half-clothed corpse had marks of a fierce struggle, as if she had fought desperately to survive. It was a macabre image. Debbie's cries for help seemed to have been muffled by the murderer using her own cloak, the shocking peek into Debbie's pain that the discovery offered. It appeared as though the perpetrator had been chasing her, waiting for the ideal moment to abduct her. Before dumping of Debbie's body in the woods, this terrible individual forced her to go through horrifying events in several locations. The community was brought together in mourning, having previously been united and resolved in hope. When word of the awful finding of Debbie's death spread around the town, Marietta was left stunned. When Joanna D. and John Randall saw their murdered daughter's body, it was like a ton of bricks, converting their horrible fear into a horrifying reality. The loss of Debbie will always leave a deep wound on everyone who knew her. Debbie was a beloved friend, sister, and daughter. The community mourned with the Randall family as they tried to come to terms with tiny Debbie's horrible fate. Following the unfortunate discovery of Debbie Lynn Randall's body, the investigation into her death became more thorough. The coroner examined the site and discovered unsettling details. Debbie had been violently beaten and strangled, as seen by the significant wounds on her body. An unidentifiable hair strand that appeared to belong to her attacker was one of the most important discoveries made throughout this examination. The constraints of medical technology in the 1970s posed a significant hurdle to the case's future progress, despite this discovery. Given the nascent stage of evidence analysis, the hair sample presented more of an optimistic outlook for the future than a panacea. In the hopes that one day new technology advancements would aid in the identification of Debbie's killer, the hair was carefully kept. Over the course of days and months, detectives pursued hundreds of leads, all of which, despite the lead's initial promise, turned out to be dead ends. Despite their best efforts, law enforcement was stuck in an annoying cycle and was unable to locate the crucial information that would have led to the case's resolution. The prolonged uncertainty and lack of closure left the Randall family with unresolved questions. They questioned who was responsible for their daughter's untimely death, as well as the actual events of that terrible evening. They had to cope with the loss of their beloved Debbie and the never-ending frustration that justice was still eluding them. The case of Debbie gradually transitioned from an ongoing inquiry to a cold case as time passed and the quantity of leads dropped. For nearly 28 years, her murder mystery remained unresolved, resulting in ongoing pain and interest. The Randall family and the people of Marietta were left to wonder if the real story of Debbie's horrific death would ever come to light. The case persisted in the collective minds of many who knew and loved Debbie, leaving unanswered questions and unfulfilled justice. However, the unresolved mystery surrounding Debbie Lynn Randall's case garnered attention again in 2001. Detective Morris Nix could not shake the eerie memory of unresolved crimes even after going through old files again. This included Debbie's case, in which he detected information that the initial 1972 inquiry had missed. Detective Morris was determined to discover answers, so he restarted the investigation. He discovered the hair strand that had been saved from the crime site as well as the long-stowed evidence box. Despite the FBI's best efforts, the owner of the hair could not be identified with the sophisticated technology of the early 2000s. Therefore, the case was placed on hold while more technical improvements were made. The case was unsolved until 2015, when Detective Morris joined the Cobb County Cold Case Unit. Thanks to advancements in medical research, the case gained pace and new life. Sandra Walker was one of the kids Debbie played with that fatal evening, and her story came to light thanks to media attention. Sandra's testimony, which had been withheld earlier due to fear, added a horrifying new dimension to the case. The horrifying events of her witnessing Debbie's kidnapping were remained vivid in her memory years later. To involve the community in job memory, police teamed up with freelance artist and graphic designer Amanda Wood. Wood spent months creating a graphic representation of Debbie's last moments. The end product is a powerful and poignant portrayal that emphasizes Debbie's innocence as well as the horrifying nature of her attack. John, Debbie's father, saved every newspaper article describing his daughter's abduction, a constant reminder of the unsolved mystery. Meanwhile, a piece of cloth bearing floral prints discovered on Debbie's body was transferred by Detective Morris to the Sorensen Forensic Lab for DNA analysis. Technology advancements made it possible to establish a partial DNA profile of an unknown male. Despite challenges, extra financing from the Criminal Justice Coordination Council allowed for new opportunities for the investigation in 2019. This was made possible by renewed DNA testing, The Randall family and the Marietta community may finally find the answers they have been searching for after years of not moving the case. The 2023 breakthrough in Debbie Lynn Randall's cold case was made possible by advancements in genetic genealogy. In collaboration with DNA Labs International, the police set out to build a single nucleotide polymorphism profile, or SMP. This was because initial efforts like evidence analysis and searches in CODIS, the combined DNA indexing system, produced no findings. When it comes to genetic profiling, the SNP profile provides a more comprehensive and perceptive approach than traditional methods. It involved a laborious procedure of searching through public and police records. Finding a DNA match for a person associated with the case was their goal. Upon discovering a match, the investigators set out to construct a complex family tree. They made an attempt to locate as many of the alleged attacker's relatives as they could. This action demonstrated how police work and community involvement are dynamic processes. The police got in touch with the suspect's relatives. The family members voluntarily provided samples of their DNA for study, which surprised the researchers. This was a pivotal moment in the inquiry that showed how community cooperation may be used to solve long-lasting riddles. The DNA evidence recovered from the crime scene clearly matched after all necessary testing. William B. Rose, a Mableton, Georgia resident, was named as the murderer. This discovery was a turning point for the Randall family and the Marietta community, who had been waiting for answers for more than 50 years. William B. Rose was born in 1950. But very little is known about him, his parents, or his career. As a result, he remains somewhat of a mystery. His life tragically changed when, at the age of 22, he abducted and killed Debbie Randall. When officials searched for Rose in 2023 in an effort to apprehend him, they unexpectedly found something they had not expected. Rose killed himself in 1974, 2 years after he had brutally murdered Debbie, because he was preoccupied with staying out of the hands of the police. This dread was evident even during the time of a previous arrest related to an alcohol-related event. Rose was never in the police radar throughout the initial inquiry, so finding out he was Debbie's killer came as a shock. Since Debbie's family lived in the same apartment complex, Rose might have seen Debbie in the local playground, where he was planning his nefarious plan. Tests clearly showed Rose to be the one who had cruelly killed Debbie Randall when the police exhumed his remains in 2023 to prove he was the offender. The long-running case of Debbie Lynn Randall ended with a bittersweet identification of William B. Rose as the perpetrator. Debbie's parents, Joanna D. and John Randall, sadly passed away before this knowledge was discovered. Joanna lost her battle with illness in 2018, and John followed in 2022. They spent decades grieving over Debbie's death at such a young age. Melvin, Debbie's brother, expressed his gratitude and relief. Retired investigator Morris Nix stated that technology was essential to solving the case. Moving on to the next case. Carla Walker. Carla Walker attended Western Hills High School in Fort Worth, Texas, as a 17-year-old junior in 1974. Carla was just 4 feet 11 inches tall, and her honey blonde hair hung below her shoulders. Rodney McCoy was her boyfriend. He was the football team's quarterback and was characterized as a wiry, sweet young man. Rodney and Carla discussed enrolling at Texas Tech University together. She confided in her closest friends that she was positive that she and Rodney would be married and have children in the future. Rodney came to the Walkers' Benbrook, far west Fort Worth, house on the evening of February 16, 1974, to drive Carla to the school's Valentine Day dance. Rodney invited a second couple to travel Camp Bowie Boulevard and the Benbrook traffic circle with him and Carla after the celebration, which was scheduled to end at around 11:30. They made stops at Taco Bell and Mr. Quick Hamburgers, 2 popular hangouts for teenagers. Rodney and Carla drove to Brunswick Ridgely Bowl, a nearby bowling venue where Carla used the restroom after dropping off the others. Carla got into the car and the passenger door flung open. Rodney glimpsed the man's height, stature, and short brown hair. He started hitting Rodney in the head with a pistol's butt. The rifle magazine clip eventually came loose and dropped into the parking lot. Carla was grabbed by the man. He said, "You're coming with me, aren't you, sweetie?" To Rodney, who was barely aware at the time, Carla said, "Rodney, go get my dad. Get my dad, please." It was around 1 in the morning when Rodney took over the wheel. The Walkers' house was less than a mile away, so he drove there quickly. He slammed on the brakes as he crossed the curb and rolled onto the front yard. Leighton and Doris, Carla's parents, were still up, playing dominoes in the dining room with family.
Before we continue, we want to remind you that only a small percentage of people who watch our videos are actually subscribed. So if you enjoy our content, consider subscribing. It's free. Now, let's move on with the video.
In the living room, Carla's 18-year-old sister Cindy and her 12-year-old brother Jim were watching TV. They were startled to see Rodney with blood streaming down his face when they heard someone pounding on the front door. He was in a panic. He said, "Mr. Walker, they got her. They will cause her great pain." Retired Lieutenant Colonel Leighton reached for his handgun and dashed to the bowling alley. Using the family's rotary phone, Doris contacted the operator and requested to speak with a police officer. They searched the parking lot and discovered the magazine clip that had come loose from the attacker's gun in Carla's purse. Other police officers searched for Carla by driving squad cars through the neighborhood. More people joined the hunt as the sun rose. A handful flew in helicopters around the city, peering with binoculars. On Monday morning, when school started again, investigators went to Western Hills High. In an attempt to find anyone who appeared out of place, they examined contact sheets of pictures taken during the dance. In the halls, they stopped children and asked them whether they knew of anyone who would wish to harm Carla. 4 days after Carla vanished, on February 20th, 1974, two of the officers tasked with her search were traveling about 5 miles southwest of the bowling alley on a secluded 2-lane road close to Benbrook Lake. They pulled over to have a look inside after spotting a culvert and a concrete tunnel intended to allow water to flow beneath the road. A young woman was seen by them lying on her back. She had significant bruises and scratches all over her face and neck. Carla was the one. There were no ligature traces around her neck, giving the impression that she had been strangled. Investigators concluded that he had used his hands to choke her. The top page of the Star-Telegram was nearly entirely devoted to news of Carla's ordeal. More than 1,050 people attended her funeral at the Western Hills Church of Christ, far more than the little sanctuary could accommodate. Detectives from the local police departments organized a task team, according to Fort Worth officials. There was not much for the group to look into. There were no fingerprints found on Carla's body or clothes. Rodney's head wounds were the source of the blood on her clothes. Though bodily fluid traces had been discovered, DNA identification technology was not yet available. Furthermore, there were no license plate scanners on the sides of highways or security cameras in parking lots during that time. The team did up a 24-hour hotline for tips. Officers stood behind metal desks at the downtown police headquarters, drinking lukewarm coffee while they listened to locals send along the names of those they thought may be involved. Numerous callers informed the cops that Carla was abducted by two pot sellers, a carnival employee at the Fort Worth Stock Show and Rodeo, and a solitary young man who frequently bowled at the alley where Carla was abducted. The night before the dance, they had heard rumors of a boy who had gotten into a fight with Rodney at Mr. Quick Hamburgers. In an attempt to get additional information out of Rodney, who had a head injury during the incident, the investigators also recruited a hypnotist. The most important thing he could remember, though, was that Carla's kidnapper had worn a brown or tan cowboy hat. Rodney sobbed when the hypnotist snapped his fingers, causing him to awaken. The fact that he was unable to save his sweetheart was causing him immense internal turmoil. In one meeting, the detectives on the task force talked about another unresolved crime that happened on February 7, 1973, nearly to the day Carla's did. That evening, Becky Martin, a young woman, left her house to attend a night class at Tarrant County Junior College's South Campus and never came back. Almost 7 weeks later, her body was discovered. The cause could not be ascertained because it was so degraded. According to the medical examiner, Becky might have been shot in the stomach, strangled, or perhaps stabbed. The location of Becky's body, which was discovered in a culvert just outside the city limits, piqued the investigators' interest the most in this case. The two girls separated by a year in two culverts. For detectives, it just appeared too coincidental. Despite their silence, the investigators started searching for a serial offender. A month after Carla was killed in March, the task force had just one little lead to work with. The magazine clip that was discovered in the parking area of the bowling alley belonged to a more recent Model 22 Ruger handgun, the detectives discovered. They requested the identities of any Fort Worth residents who had acquired that model from the federal government's Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms. The task force proceeded to question every individual on the list of several dozen that the ATF had produced. Glenn McCurley, a 31-year-old truck driver, was one of the men on the list. McCurley, the oldest of 3 sons, grew up in West Texas. His parents sent him to the Westview Boys' Home in southwest Oklahoma when he was a teenager. Sponsored by the Churches of Christ, Westview positions itself as a haven for boys who are deprived because of a family member's illness, boys who are having serious difficulties residing with their family, boys in need of supervision, and delinquent boys, boys who have broken the law but do not require treatment or incarceration, as well as boys who have been abandoned, abused, or neglected. McCurley's experience at the home was obviously not life-changing, though it's unclear why he was sent there or for how long. He had left Westview by February 1961 and was living in Abilene, Texas when he committed auto theft. He left that automobile there after that and stole another. He was being pursued by the State Highway Patrol when one of his tires burst. He tried to flee on foot after driving the car onto an empty lot but was apprehended right away. McCurley entered a guilty plea in court and was given a 2-year sentence. At the age of 19, he was set free in the early spring of 1962. After a while, he relocated to Midland, where he became friends with Judy Watson, a blonde high school student. McCurley wed Judy on February 16, 1963, at a Baptist church. The youthful duo relocated to a modest rental residence. Eventually, McCurley was hired by the U.S. Postal Service as a truck driver, and his route included the Dallas-Fort Worth area. Craig and Roddy are the 2 sons Judy gave birth to. Then, in 1972, McCurley relocated his small family to a West Fort Worth neighborhood. McCurley and Judy joined Ridgely West Baptist Church and registered their boys in the public primary school. McCurley secured a new employment as a truck driver, transporting prefabricated concrete slabs to building sites. Judy was employed at the church's daycare facility. A man acquainted with McCurley observed an unappealing behavior. He would say something like, "Take a look at that," when he saw a lovely girl. 2 detectives showed up at McCurley's house at the beginning of March 1974 to question him about his Ruger 22 pistol. McCurley informed the authorities that the rifle had been taken from his pickup truck when he was fishing 6 weeks prior when they inquired about it. Then, after agreeing to travel to downtown, he took and passed a polygraph exam. He was immediately ruled out as a possible suspect by the task force. The investigators' progress was still somewhat slow by the late spring of 1974. Although the task force didn't formally dissolve, several of the detectives received orders from their managers to resume working on other investigations. Every now and then, strangers would phone the Walkers, a lot of them anonymous, saying they knew who killed Carla. Layton spoke with each individual. He made notes and stored them in a cigar box-sized metal box. He circled the locations on maps where he had been told the offender lived and jotted down the names and addresses of possible suspects. Until he was certain that the guilty individual was in jail, he was not going to stop. Jim, Carla's younger brother, started assisting his father in the pursuit of the culprit after he reached 16 and obtained a driver's license. On several occasions, he would skulk around the Ridgely Bowl parking lot on the anniversary, searching for anyone who seemed off. Jim joined the high school football and wrestling teams, learned boxing techniques at the Panther Boys Club, and enjoyed long runs around his neighborhood. Jim remarked, "I wanted to be prepared in case I ever found the culprit. My strategy was to subdue him and carry him off to a remote location, perhaps in West Texas, where no one would be able to hear him scream." Nearly 3 years after Carla's body was discovered, on February 19, 1977, a 25-year-old vocational nurse named June Ward was found dead next to a South Fort Worth curb. With the exception of a bra strap around her neck, June was completely nude. The lone reporter said that she had been struck on the head and strangled with a hefty, pointed weapon. The two crimes were so similar that detectives who had been part of the Carla Walker task force couldn't help but notice them. Then, on July 9, 1980, the death of Denise Hoag, a 19-year-old transient who was characterized as jobless in the papers, was discovered in South Fort Worth, just a short distance from a stream bridge. She had also been choked. The body of Christy Tower, a waitress at the family Billy Bob's Texas nightclub in the Stockyards, was found in a field north of the city in February 1983, 2.5 years later. Electrical wire was used to bind her hands, and another piece of wire was wrapped around her neck. Christie's case, like the other crimes, was never fully solved. However, detectives learned an odd piece of information a few days after her death was discovered. They discovered that Christie's handbag had been discovered in a dumpster near the Champ Bowie Boulevard nightclub, Cheers. Cheers was situated around 0.5 miles away from the Brunswick Ridgely bowling alley, where Carla was abducted in February 1974. Concerns among the locals over the possibility of a serial offender were growing. When 23-year-old Catherine Davis, an aspiring model, vanished on September 9, 1984, these worries intensified. In a field in far south Fort Worth, her body was discovered. Marilyn Hartman, a 25-year-old middle school teacher, was discovered strangled and bound in her Fort Worth bedroom about 1 month later on October 19th. 3 days later, Cindy Heller, a 23-year-old former beauty contestant and graduate of Texas Christian University, vanished, last seen close to Hewlin Mall. On the campus of Texas Christian University, she was subsequently discovered strangled in a creek bed. The catastrophes continued to mount. Another middle school teacher in the area, Catherine Jackson, was discovered naked in her bathtub with the water running on November 26, 1984. A cable had been used to strangle her. 2 weeks later, 21-year-old Angela Ewart, a part-time FM rock station programmer and model, moved out of her fiancé's Southwest Fort Worth home. Her automobile was discovered abandoned along a roadway in the southern part of the city the next day, and her decaying body was later located in a field north of Fort Worth. A few days before Christmas, on December 22nd, Regina Grover, 21, was spotted leaving The Keg, a restaurant on Camp Bowie, with her boyfriend. She was discovered the following day, having been strangled and drowning in a creek beneath a North Fort Worth bridge. Her partner had been fatally bludgeoned when he was discovered in his flat bed. Women in Fort Worth were in a panic, particularly those in the southwest area of the city. The local press covered the dramatic growth in gun and mace sales. Over 3,000 people, the majority of whom were women, attended a free self-defense session hosted by the police department. Another task group was organized by the police department. Police Chief H.F. Hopkins said, "We're going to break this." Every suspect was questioned by detectives, including freelance photographers and ex-cons with lengthy criminal histories. However, the study yielded no results. The only good news was that there were less crimes. The offender seems to have backed off, assuming there was only one. Up until February 24, 1986, that is, a woman's naked body was found partially covered by a blanket and resting on a slope close to a central Fort Worth park by a passerby. Despite the fact that she had been strangled, the police were unable to identify her using dental records or fingerprints, and they were also not notified of any missing women reports that could have offered a lead. 1 year came to an end, and then another. And this time, it really did seem as though the man who was perpetrating all these crimes, who was unknown, had finally withdrawn. Jim, Carla Walker's younger brother, had persisted. Jim had gone to Sam Houston State University after graduating from Western Hills High School. There, he studied abnormal psychology and read books on serial criminals in an effort to gain a deeper understanding of what he called the criminal mentality. He returned to Fort Worth after receiving his college degree and submitted an application to join the police force there as an officer. His goal was to become a detective, obtain Carla's files, and identify the offending individual. But Jim discovered there was a problem with his vision during a training session at the Academy's firing range. He was later identified by a physician as having a congenital eye ailment. After being forced to leave the academy, he started working as a security guard at a local General Dynamics office, a weapons contractor. However, he didn't stop looking for the guilty individual. Looking for fresh clues to follow, Jim went through the notes in Layton's metal box after his father died in 1987 from a heart attack. Jim bought his parents' house in 2015 and moved in with his wife following the death of his mother. He remarked, "I wanted to be there in case somebody ever woke up at 3 in the morning and came to confess." Jim submitted a request, and in January 2019, investigators Leah Wagner and Officer Jeff Bennett decided to re-examine Carla's case. One of the people they re-interviewed was Rodney McCoy, Carla's former lover, who had left Fort Worth as soon as he finished from high school to work on an oil rig and had informed his family that he had to relocate as far away as possible. Eventually, Wagner and Bennett found him living close to Austin after he had returned to Texas. Investigators put up a statement on the police department's Facebook page in an attempt to find more witnesses. They received a dozen or so replies. One from a woman saying her former husband had grown up in Carla's area and had saved a stack of newspaper stories about her case, which he would sometimes read again. The ex-wife claimed it was probably a sign he was in charge. To the dismay of his former spouse, the ex-husband was able to demonstrate that he had been out of town the weekend Carla was abducted. Physical evidence was what the investigators required, and the culprit's DNA was naturally the greatest physical evidence they could hope to find. Since Carla's death, DNA identification technology has not only advanced beyond anyone's wildest dreams, but it has also advanced significantly. There were even labs these days that focused on genealogy mapping, where technicians connect the DNA of an unknown individual to the ancestors of that individual using publicly available information. Luckily for Wagner and Bennett, Carla's dress and other items she'd worn the night she was killed had been meticulously stored in paper bags in the evidence lab of the police department. This meant that there was still a possibility that specialists might find a viable sample of her DNA. But whether the DNA had deteriorated after all these years was unknown, and that would keep the technicians from creating a complete genetic profile of the man in question. Again, the Fort Worth Police Department might have to spend up to $20,000 on Carla's clothing for DNA testing, money that would have been better used on open investigations. Wagner and Bennett knew the odds were stacked against them, but they were determined to follow at least one strong lead. Their investigation then went in an unexpected direction. Vincent Strange, a Fort Worth aerospace technician and enthusiast for true crime, was 40 years old. He started a podcast about unresolved Texas cases in 2017. He had been researching Carla Walker's case online and decided to write her narrative as his first. He spoke with several of Carla's acquaintances and her siblings, Jim and Cindy. Diane Kuykendall was one person who gave it some attention. Diane had attended the same school as Carla. In the corridor, Carla never failed to smile at her, even though they were strangers. Diane expressed her gratitude to Carla and wished there was a way she could repay her. Diane made the decision to take a plane to Nashville to go to CrimeCon, a 3-day real crime convention that takes place every year and recently drew 5,000 attendees. 80 copies of a leaflet she had written on Carla's plight were brought by her. She distributed the booklets to celebrities like Nancy Grace of Fox News, Keith Morrison of Dateline, and Paul Holes, an Oxygen Network retired investigator. Intrigued, Paul Holes persuaded Oxygen to shell over $18,000 for the expense of having Carla's clothing tested for DNA. Technicians in a California lab discovered some undamaged, pure body fluid. They created a complete DNA profile from that fluid, which they then submitted to CODIS, a national law enforcement database that houses the DNA of millions of criminal defendants. But CODIS was unable to locate a match. Paul Holes and his team reached out to a Texas-based lab that specializes in genealogy mapping, but the technicians there were likewise unsuccessful. The Othram CEO, David Mittelman, then reached out to Paul Holes. He expressed optimism that his specialized DNA identification technique, which made use of genome sequencing, would be able to locate a match. Officer Bennett received a call from David Mittelman early on July 4, 2020. He remarked, "We've linked the DNA to a specific family tree. The surname McCurley is used." Following more examinations and investigations by the police, Middleman and Bennett finally identified Glenn Samuel McCurley Jr., who was residing in Fort Worth at the time of Carla's death. Bennett saw that Glenn McCurley Jr., the truck driver, had reported his Ruger 22 as stolen to the police in 1974. After conducting a background investigation on McCurley, Wagner and Bennett found not much information. He had no run-ins with the law as far as they could determine, save from his 1961 felony conviction for automobile theft at the age of 18. By then, McCurley was no longer a full-time truck driver. He worked part-time as a fitness club maintenance worker and as a handyman. Bennett and Wagner made the decision to see him. They showed up at the McCurley's house without warning. McCurley and his spouse Judy greeted the detectives with a smile and cordially invited them into their living room. McCurley discussed his previous experiences driving trucks. Judy stated that she had worked at the Ridgely West Baptist daycare program for 32 years, resigning in 2004 due to health concerns. She also disclosed that her spouse had diabetes and had just undergone liver surgery to remove a tumor the size of a quarter. Judy replied, "We're not ready for this, especially with his cancer." At last, McCurley questioned the investigators, "What do y'all want to talk about?" in a hoarse voice. Wagner declared, "We're going to take you way, way back." In 1974, to be exact. "You might have heard about it because you guys were residing here at the time. A young woman was abducted from a bowling alley." Judy answered right away, "I know exactly which one you're talking about. Walker Carla." Judy then admitted to the detectives that she could recall the Williams Road address of the Walker family. She replied that they had left her room exactly how it was. For years and years, they left her automobile sitting in the driveway. It was simply so incredibly painful to see that car sitting in the driveway when you would pass by. According to Detective Wagner, Bennett and she had revived the inquiry and were getting in touch with people who had been questioned by police in 1974. She said that it's a big case. "And we noticed that they had spoken with you before, Mr. McCurley." Wagner requested that McCurley provide a DNA sample. She emphasized that it would be the simplest way to rule him out as a suspect. McCurley paused. Then he picked up a pen, signed a consent form, and parted his lips to allow Wagner to use a Q-tip to dab the inside of his cheek. Judy begged the cops, "I hope you find out who is responsible," as she continued. "It is important to remember that girl as someone who was important." Members of the U.S. Marshals North Texas Fugitive Task Team visited McCurley's home 11 days later with the intention of apprehending him after lab technicians confirmed that the DNA extracted from his cheek precisely matched the DNA discovered on Carla's bra strap. After being brought downtown to the police department, he gave up the right to an attorney's presence during his questioning. He was sitting by himself in an interview room for a few minutes. He first denied having any part in it. He declared that he had never before seen Carla Walker. At last, he murmured, "Okay," tears finally welling up in his eyes. "I suppose I did do it." He admitted to the detectives that he had consumed beer and whiskey for several hours in the afternoon on February 16, 1974. He claimed to have started driving and to have pulled into a few parking lots. He once took a car to the bowling ball location. McCurley appeared to be on the verge of confessing. He claimed to have heard a girl screaming in a neighboring automobile to the detectives instead. "I went to check if I could be of any assistance. She was jerked around by this enormous guy who had her up against the door." McCurley claimed to have wrestled with the youngster after opening the front passenger door. After pushing Carla away, he drove her to another parking lot and back to his car. She began to praise me and hug me, and then things got bigger. He asserted that he was unaware of Carla's subsequent events and that everything that transpired between them was voluntary. McCurley entered a not guilty plea following a conversation with his court-appointed attorneys. In court documents, McCurley's counsel contended that Wagner and Bennett had forced McCurley to make a false confession and that the Othram Labs DNA test was faulty. McCurley was also depicted by the lawyers as weak. There is no one to be afraid of this man. To the best of my knowledge, he has had a completely boring life. On June 16, 2021, 9 months later, the first pre-trial hearing was held in public. McCurley was wheeled into the courtroom while wearing a green jumpsuit that was provided by the jail. A few months later, when the trial actually began, Carla's boyfriend Rodney gave testimony on the night she disappeared. Jim Minter, a retired investigator, spoke about the preliminary inquiry into Carla's case, while Wagner and Bennett gave testimony regarding their own law enforcement assignments. The jury was shown the powder blue dress that Carla had been wearing the night she was kidnapped by prosecutors Emily Dixon and Divignon. 3 hours of the videotaped interview that Wagner and Bennett had done with McCurley following his arrest were also shown. Subsequently, the prosecution presented an unexpected piece of proof: McCurley's .22 Rummer handgun, which they asserted had been pilfered. It had been tucked away in a compartment above a door when police searched his house. Naturally, the case was over and done. McCurley entered a guilty plea on the third day of the trial, and the court promptly sentenced him to life in prison. Many unanswered questions remained in the wake of the trial. Why would a man without a history of violent crimes like Glenn McCurley have perpetrated such a cruel crime? Was McCurley a sadistic serial killer who previously killed other young Fort Worth ladies? Or was it just an impulsive drunken act? Furthermore, why did he abruptly cease in the middle of the 1980s if he was a serial offender? Had he really had a change of heart? Was there any chance of that happening? Investigations into McCurley's involvement in numerous additional crimes are still ongoing, according to investigators. Moving on to the next case. Theo Hayes. While Australia is home to some of the most magnificent terrain and oceans in the world, its immensity makes it an unforgiving vacation destination where nothing is certain save adventure. Situated in Australia's New South Wales, Byron Bay is a perfect blend of adventure and spiritual awakening, with a hint of pretentiousness mixed in with the stunning scenery. Byron Bay boasts a vibrant nightlife and is a well-liked travel destination for the daring and well-informed. However, some who have been there claim that the area's rugged Lost Coast vibe can come across as a little pompous. Most visitors to the neighborhood report that the people there are typically cordial to those passing through, although some older inhabitants seem to be cautious of the steady stream of mainly young and foreign faces. With almost 2 million tourists annually, this very small town is distinct in that it has more visitors than residents. Theo Hayes, an 18-year-old Belgian, was one of those guests. He had traveled around Australia for the most of the previous year. Theo was initially undecided about going to college like many of his friends or taking a gap year to travel, but in the end, he concluded that studying engineering in college could wait a year because adventure never stops. But as his gap year would soon come to an end amid dire uncertainty for friends and family, he would soon discover that misadventure is just as impatient and fickle a creature. People close to Theo said he had a great time on his trip. He spent a lot of time with his cousin Lisa Hayes, who cherished her memories of Theo's distinct viewpoint on taking a year off. She remembers that Theo was much more methodical in his pursuit of spiritual fulfillment through nature, whereas other recent high school graduates were spending their first year of freedom abusing recreational drugs and imbibing excessive amounts of alcohol. According to friends who knew him in Belgium as well as Australia, Theo was the kind of person who genuinely cared about having a meaningful conversation and made an effort to build relationships with people wherever he went. His relative also remembers his aptitude for organizing and planning. Theo was regarded as one of the more responsible kids in his age group. He had regular, multiple weekly conversations with his mother and remained connected to his family who lived abroad. The 18-year-old arrived on Wednesday, May 29, 2019, at Byron Bay. His unofficial schedule was to spend the rest of his vacation time lounging around the city. He didn't have to do anything in particular as long as he could get to his Greyhound bus, which would return him to the Sydney-Melbourne area on June 3rd. After that, he intended to take a plane back to Belgium to begin the next phase of his adventure, which would take him to college and eventually a job. One of the nicer and more reputable hostels in the neighborhood, Wake Up Hostel, was the place Theo decided to stay. The hostel, which is situated in Belangol, is just a 20-minute walk from the town square, making it a popular destination for tourists while being somewhat remote from the main downtown area. In addition to offering a free shuttle to and from town, Wake Up Hostel lets visitors bring their bikes as an extra draw for low-cost vacationers. The entire Byron Bay town is fairly compact, and many claim that if you're fit enough, you can walk everywhere in the town, negating the need for a car. Theo was able to secure a private room at the hostel. Despite being the only guest, Theo quickly bonded with other backpackers, which his loved ones fondly remembers as being quite typical of him. He also did not waste any time in exploring the local social scene to make the most of his final days in the nation he had lived in for over a year. On May 31st, 2019, Theo arrived in town early in the evening by the free shuttle bus. This would be the final night anyone would ever see him. It was a really cold night in the heart of winter in Australia. In actuality, it was the coldest night in Byron's history during the months of May and June. According to historical weather data from the Cape Byron Weather Station, the temperature reached a high of 17 degrees Celsius or 62 degrees Fahrenheit that day, but by sunset, it had dropped all the way to 9 degrees Celsius, or just 48 degrees Fahrenheit. Theo and his buddies would not have anticipated this low temperature because it is unusual for the region. Theo headed to the Great Northern Hotel with his friends to get some rose wine. They are seen making the purchase at 7:45 p.m. on CCTV footage. Detectives subsequently acquired security footage, and nothing strange or suspicious was shown. It appeared to be a typical alcohol purchase made by carefree young men getting ready for a night on the town. Theo and his new companions bought the rose, then took the free shuttle bus back to the hostel to enjoy the wine on the hostel porch with other guests. Later, Theo and a few other visitors took the shuttle once more, this time to Cheeky Monkey's, a popular pub with a reputation for being among Australia's most violent establishments in the early 2000s, according to some residents. While this might have been the case in 2019, the bar's reputation for mischief has reportedly altered as a result of a chain corporation taking it. Though it is a few blocks from the main town center, this bar is quite centrally located as it is situated on one of the town's two main roadways. Walking through the town at night has been described by visitors as an unsettling experience due to inadequate lighting and frequently very little foot traffic. Although Byron, a beach town, is busy during the summer, there is less of a tourist influx in the winter, and this particular night was particularly quiet because of the unusually cold weather. Bartenders at Cheeky Monkey's later claimed that they were only approximately 25% full. Theo bought 2 drinks from the bar, and that, along with the wine he had already had, apparently resulted in some form of noticeable inebriation since, at approximately 11 p.m., security personnel led Theo out. According to witnesses, Theo was clumsy on his feet rather than being crude. Although there is disagreement over how he was led out, CCTV shows him leaving the bar. The final known moment Theo Hayes was seen alive would be captured in this video. It was easy to return from the bar to the hostel. Even at night after a few beers, locals claim that finding Wake Up Hostel would not be too difficult if you just followed the neon signs and bright lights. Theo's Google data revealed that he never returned to the hostel that evening, despite the fact that it should have only taken him 20 minutes to walk there. This suggests that Theo made an effort to go there. At 11 p.m., Theo departed from the bar. The CCTV film captures him leaving the bar and entering the dimly lighted sidewalks of Kingsley Street, which is a street that runs parallel to Johnson. Theo then went on to take the most ridiculous path at occasionally unsettling speeds, a decision that has baffled friends, family, and investigators. Theo went away from the hostel, even though he had a phone to inform him differently, according to data from Google Maps. He turned into Tennyson Street from Kingsley Street and proceeded to the wide open field that served as the Youth Recreation Center. The information indicates that he proceeded to walk quickly all the way to the Millen track. Though the statistics is not perfect, it's possible that he was racing. Theo traveled quickly through the Millen track and then, in a very roundabout way, made his way to Tallow Beach, which is adjacent. Investigators claim that if you weren't familiar with the location, it would have been very impossible to navigate through the dense undergrowth that this trail would have brought him through at such high speeds. For this reason, among others, there are conjectures that Theo was not by himself. His route was peculiar to relatives and residents alike. The hostel was the other way, as anyone with eyes could see. Theo had been walking with someone, so where was he heading, and was he alone? His parents thought he was a gregarious and secure individual who would never have gone anywhere without a friend. The fact that Theo made it through in such a short period of time is very surprising because locals claim that the pitch blackness of the bush that Theo was moving through at that time of night may be disorienting even to people who are familiar with the area. The fact that few tourists visit that location adds to the suspicion that Theo was not alone. The Milne track is not particularly impressive or lovely, nor is it particularly approachable. The track merely heads out to the shore of Talos Beach from Milne Street, passing through thick, harsh vegetation. The place is neither noteworthy nor exceptional. According to data from Google Maps, Theo swiftly left the bushland and walked in the direction of Cozy Corner Beach. Theo continued to message people while all of this was going on. From there, officials obtained Theo's cell phone records, which indicate that throughout this period, he texted several buddies. Because the texts were in French, his native tongue, and were written in his syntactically expressive manner, his pals are adamant that he was the one sending them and not a fraud. According to police reports, Theo messaged a buddy on Facebook at 12:50 in the morning about a forthcoming YouTube tour that was scheduled to take place in Australia. At 12:55 a.m., Theo texted his stepsister his last text message. The prior text, CIE, which is the French word for thank you followed by an emoji of a kiss, was not made public by the police. The message was on WhatsApp. This was the final message he ever sent to anyone that we are aware of. Theo also watched an unidentified YouTube video during this time, according to Google data that the authorities obtained. Information taken from his Google account indicates that he used Google Maps several times to find the way back to his backpacker hostel, but it's unclear why he chose to stray from the straightforward instructions the Google Maps program would have provided. And then, just before midnight, Theo lost connection. On June 1st, the next afternoon at 1:42 p.m., Theo's cell phone signal rang. Theo's phone was on at that specific moment, but no one knows for sure how long or why. The police have not released this information because this ping, which differs from internet data usage, is simply a connection of the cell phone talking to a local cell tower, something even non-smartphones do. The Cape Byron cell tower, which is near Cozy Corner Beach, was the tower to which it was connected. Theo's phone was never able to establish a cellular connection again after this 142-meter ping. Even after Theo's checkout date had passed, the hostel refused to report him missing for a few days. The setting and location of this specific backpackers hostel are often overlooked by critics and media stories, despite the fact that some were extremely critical of the decision for delaying the crucial 48 hours of a missing person investigation. The hostel had no first cause for concern because of the vast volume of young guests that arrive and depart from this area without notice. Tourists who came to rediscover their spiritual side via nature frequently used drugs and alcohol. Thus, this kind of conduct was not abnormal and was typically the result of wanderlust rather than bad luck. Eventually, Theo's mother contacted the local authorities after nearly 72 hours had passed without hearing from him. An investigation into missing persons was launched, but by then, a lot of people had complained that the trail had dried up. When investigators investigated his hostel room, they discovered it to be unaltered, free of any indications of a struggle or that Theo had made an attempt to pack up and leave. His passport, hygiene products, and bags were all still in their original locations, and it appeared that he had brought along just enough for a one-night out. Authorities searched the area around Byron Bay thoroughly, combing through the air, land, and water. In an attempt to locate Theo, the search and rescue team sent dogs, drones, helicopters, climbers, and divers. Theo's parents arrived at Byron Bay on May 10th and started looking for him with the help of neighborhood volunteers. They posted flyers for missing persons all around the town, but despite their best efforts, they were unable to locate Theo. Officially, the police canceled the physical search on July 3rd. The police decided to continue the search for Theo, but they did not know if he was still alive. Theo's parents, however, were not able to locate Theo. Volunteers kept looking for the 18-year-old missing for almost a month after he was reported missing. A volunteer search team discovered a cap a few days later, on July 7th, which seemed to be the same as the one that Theo was last seen wearing in the CCTV film that the police had gotten. The location of the lighthouse where his phone had last rung was where the cap was discovered. Although a DNA test result has not yet been made public, Theo's family is positive that his hat was discovered. Theo is one of the more than 2,600 individuals in Australia on the long-term missing list. Those who haven't been seen or heard from in 3 months or more are placed in this category. Only a few kilometers from Byron Bay, 6 people on the list vanish, and their enigmatic disappearances remain unsolved. The fatalities occur over a 3-decade period, and although the police claim they do not believe there is a link between the deaths and age, race, or gender, they are unable to rule out any linkages at this time, either generally or within patterns or subgroups of previous missing victims. 3 weeks after Theo vanished from sight, a Byron local discovered a big stick bearing a menacing message and a disturbing suggestion while strolling around the Clark's Beach dunes. There looked to be bloodstains on the big stick. The wife of the guy who found the stick remembers that her husband saw the blood-like smears and the weird lettering first, then the obtrusive object while he was strolling. While she waited for the police to come get the stick, she shared a photo of it on social media. She claims that although the authorities did remove the stick from her, they did not process the area like they would have a crime scene or take any pictures of the surrounding area. The words, "The Judge," are in large black characters on a pole that is thick in the girth and measures about 1.5 meters, or about 5 feet, long. Duct tape is used to wrap one end of the stick. Although there has been no update on this case, investigators frequently conceal test data to rule out fake confessions or avoid impeding an arrest. Shortly afterward, a woman reported to the police that she had seen 2 guys on the Pacific Highway on June 2nd, 2 days after Theo vanished. About 4:30 a.m., one of the males, who looked to be in his 40s, flagged her down close to Coffs Harbor, which is about 240 kilometers south of Byron Bay. The second man appeared to be dead or comatose as he lay there on the road. She felt scared, so she chose not to stop, and she later called the police and posted a video of the incident on Facebook. She is crying in it because she thinks someone might have suffered terrible injuries. Despite searching the area, the men were not located by the police. Later, when the woman saw a news article on Theo, she noticed that the man who was lying in the road was dressed in the same light-colored slacks and black shoes that Theo had been spotted wearing on CCTV when he was last seen alive. She reported it to the authorities, but she never heard back. Theo's father has the final say for the time being. While at the police station, he made an emotional plea to the media, saying, "I promised Theo's little brother that I would bring his brother home. Please assist me in honoring my pledge to him."
Moving on to the next case.
The Anja Cooney Mystery. In every region of the world, there have been rumors that have circulated about strange mass disappearances. One of the most well-known examples of this type of case is the mystery surrounding the fate of the people who lived in Roanoke Colony because they were last seen alive on 15/87. The first half of the 21st century, however, was the time period in which one of the most intriguing occurrences of mass disappearance occurred. A Canadian hunter by the name of Joe Labelet entered a community on the shores of Lake Anjikuni, which is located in the territory of Nunavut, Canada, on a chilly night in November 1930. Lake Anjikuni is located in northwestern Canada. In spite of the fact that he was worn out, hungry, and chilly, he was looking forward to spending the night at the Inuit community since he had a positive relationship with the people who lived there. Nevertheless, there was a significant problem. The community had fallen into a spooky silence, and there was not a single person to be found anywhere in the vicinity. Inside of one of the residences, he discovered a pot of stew that was still simmering and steaming on the stove. The clothes of the residence was gathered together in a single location, and a great number of sleds were spotted laying around. Joe was under the impression that the members of the group had traveled on foot wherever they had gone. Nevertheless, when he made his way around the perimeter of the settlement, he noticed that there was not a single footprint remaining in the snow. After a couple of days had passed, the Royal Canadian Mounted Police were made aware of this peculiar occurrence, and they swiftly sent a number of officers to conduct an investigation. During their search of the village, they came across the fact that the local cemetery had been desecrated. It appeared as though each and every body had been removed and disinterred previously. What is even more peculiar is that the officers reported seeing a bright blue light that pulsed intensely on the horizon above them. 3 miles away and several hours earlier, a fur trapper by the name of Armand Laurent and his 2 boys were making their way to a neighboring cabin in order to seek refuge when they noticed a cigar-shaped object floating silently above them. As soon as they were unable to respond, the object underwent a transformation and began moving in the direction of the Anjikuni settlement. As of right now, there is not much else that is known about this case. If there is one thing that can be said with absolute certainty, it is that during the month of November in the year 1930, roughly 30 people, including men, women, and children, reportedly left their homes and disappeared from the face of the planet. If these unfortunate victims were murdered, or if something supernatural took place there, it is possible that we will never know the truth.
Moving on to the next case.
Dylan Rounds. What became of Idaho farmer Dylan Rounds, a 19-year-old? How could a young man who was well known for his outdoor passion just disappear? Does he remain alive? These are the questions that have engulfed the farming villages in East Idaho's rural areas where Dylan grew up surrounded by breathtaking scenery. When Dylan was only 4 years old, his parents, Justin and Candace Rounds, got divorced. As a result, he divided his time between Idaho Falls, where his father lived, and Twin Falls, where their mother lived, along with his younger brother and sister. Even though they were far apart, Dylan felt a strong connection to the outdoors, a fundamental part of Idahoan culture at both places. He was deeply in love with the wilderness at an early age, finding pleasure and comfort there. Dylan had a distinct love for the outdoors, whether he was climbing through dense forests, fishing in crystal-clear mountain streams, or just exploring tough terrain. On May 28, 2022, the young man, who was well known for his love of the outdoors and his spirit of adventure, was reported missing. That morning, he called his grandma and told her he was taking the grain truck into shelter. After that, he did not hear from her again. Dylan abruptly disappeared from his own farm property in Lewiston, Nevada, where he was residing in an RV trailer close to the Nevada-Utah line. This led to a murder inquiry that uncovered a startling chain of events. Unsettling evidence was swiftly found during the investigation. A pair of Dylan's boots was found by deputies close to his property during the first search for him. DNA testing identified a bloodstain on one of the boots as belonging to Dylan, and the boots also contained the DNA of a guy named James Brenner. This implied the possibility of manipulation following Dylan's vanishing. Around the time of Dylan's disappearance, Brenner was known to be a squatter living on Dylan's land. Brenner was one of Dylan's last contacts before he vanished, according to his parents. Dylan's phone records were then examined, and they showed that he had been at a secluded Luton property on the day before he disappeared. Dylan's phone's last signal was located at the Lewiston Pond. After doing a complete search, Dylan's phone was found. A time-lapse movie that was shot around the time of Dylan's disappearance was discovered through digital forensic examination of his phone. Brenner was seen in the video cleaning a gun with obvious bloodstains on his shirt and arms. Authorities examined the clothing and determined that Dylan's DNA was present. The evidence was mounting, and it was clear that Brenner was involved in Dylan Rounds' abduction and likely death. Dylan's family and the community awaited justice as detectives carried out their job, hoping for answers that would put an end to this awful case. Based on strong evidence acquired during the inquiry, Brenner was charged with 2 major felonies in March 2023. First-degree felony and abuse or degradation of a human body, which is also a third-degree crime. The time-lapse video, the shirt Brenner wore in the video that showed traces of Dylan's DNA, and the DNA found on Dylan's boots that were found during the initial search efforts were the main pieces of evidence that the prosecution used to build their case. The investigation brought Brenner's worrisome criminal past to light in addition to the evidence findings. His violent past was well documented, and he had already served a prison sentence for felon in possession of a firearm. Dylan's family and the community continued to hold out hope for justice and resolution in the heartbreaking tragedy as the court process moved forward. Because of the overwhelming evidence and Brenner's past, a bleak picture was drawn, making both the public and the authorities eager for this tragic saga to come to an end. Authorities continued to aggressively search for Dylan's body as part of the ongoing investigation into his abduction and probable death. Extensive searches have been conducted in the regions where Dylan was last observed, with a particular emphasis on sites connected to the evidence amassed in Brenner's case. Dylan was not found by the detectives, and their search was abandoned. Brenner and the Box Elder County Attorney's Office reached a plea agreement in 2024. He had to reveal Dylan's last resting place in order to have his charges dropped. Eventually, on April 9, 2024, nearly 2 years later, Dylan's skeleton remains were found in the isolated Lewiston area of western Box Elder County. He was shot in the head and died as a result. Dylan's family has set up a Facebook page and a special website. The initial goals of these platforms were to disseminate information about the continuing search operations, make updates on the investigation's progress, and give the community a way to offer tips or information that could help in the Dylan search. After he was located, they made use of the platforms to support more national searches for missing persons. The consequences of violence and the community's unwavering quest for the truth are brought home by Dylan's story. More than 24 of Dylan's family members were present for the sentencing on July 1, 2024. Brenner was told by Dylan's father, "This is how you repay Dylan for all the times he helped you. All I can hope is that you consider this for the rest of your life." Brenner was hired by Dylan to labor on his farm, and on occasion, the two of them even shared meals. Brenner has not spoken to the court or provided any more details regarding the events that led him to kill Dylan. He refused to stand in front of Dylan's family as well as other friends and supporters who had come in the courtroom. James Brenner received a sentence that included a maximum 30-year jail term. Because of his lack of empathy, the judge will encourage the parole board to keep him behind bars for as long as feasible. Although the court aspect of it, and the worry of constantly waiting to find out what will happen, when, and what if it doesn't, are things we can now put to rest, according to Dylan's mother, it does not necessarily put it to rest. While we had hoped for a better outcome, we knew from the beginning that Dylan was no longer living, according to another family member. With this latest revelation, the investigation has completed its full circle, allowing us to finally return Dylan home and bring this chapter to an end.
Moving on to the next case.
Daniel Ashton Walker. What if a calm morning trip abruptly descended into a terrifying nightmare? How does a well-liked member of the community end up the victim of an unprovoked violent act? And what happens when justice eludes us for over half a century? Daniel Ashton Walker was well-liked and well-respected in his community for his kind disposition and always readiness to provide a helping hand to those in need. But the peacefulness of his life was suddenly upended on that tragic October 1, 1974 morning. He had no idea that a gloomy cloud was gathering over his peaceful existence. Daniel's day began as any other, with little indication of the disaster that would befall him. Daniel went about his everyday activities, not realizing that his life was about to take a drastic shift as the sun rose higher and higher in the sky, illuminating the heavens in shades of orange and pink. Daniel's Volkswagen van was parked in San Bernardino County, California, alongside Interstate 40, some 60 miles west of Needles. Ken Robinson, an 18-year-old hitchhiker, accompanied him on the ride. They had made the decision to pause their travels and recuperate for a bit. He packed up his van and departed from his family in Santa Ana the previous day, heading back home. The vastness of the California desert opened up in front of them, providing a brief break from the routine of their everyday existence. Daniel and Ken settled down to get ready for a little break in their journey as the clock reached 6 in the morning. They lay back in the van, enjoying the quiet before the storm, as the serene tranquility of the early morning hours engulfed them. The abrupt crackling of gunfire startled Daniel, shattering the peace of their little rest. A shooter who was yet unidentified had come out of the shadows and ripped through the still morning air with a hail of bullets. Daniel was struck several times while unprepared and at a loss for protection. Fearful and driven by survival instinct, Ken avoided the onslaught as the mayhem spread. They ran from the scene, running into the darkness of the early morning as they prayed for rescue. They eventually managed to stop a passing driver who immediately called the police. As soon as emergency responders arrived, they got to work moving Daniel to a local hospital. Daniel's life was sadly cut short as a result of his injuries, despite the medical team's best efforts to stabilize him. On the verge of turning 22, Daniel Ashton Walker was a cherished young man who had passed away. With unyielding devotion, law enforcement searched the site painstakingly for any evidence that would provide light on the identity of the elusive attacker. Detectives first believed that the shooting was motivated by robbery as they investigated Daniel's terrible death, but confusing facts surfaced that called into question this theory. The thieves had surprisingly only taken $80 from Daniel, mysteriously leaving behind travelers' checks totaling a sizable $600. The fact that the attackers had left Daniel's motorcycle, stereo, and luggage in the back of his vehicle undisclosed further complicated the situation. Law enforcement officers in California, Nevada, and Arizona were alerted and stopped each gold van that fit the reported description after receiving a detailed description of the suspect's vehicle. When the suspect's gold van got trapped in the sand earlier that morning, the delivery man told investigators that the suspects waved him down. One of the suspects informed the delivery man that they were traveling to Indiana and that, in case they were stranded, they would use the sagebrush and shotgun to shoot down poles to provide traction for their tires. The delivery man assisted with the van's towing but declined to be paid for his work. The fact that law enforcement authorities from other states coordinated highlighted how serious the issue was. This demonstrated their dedication to obtaining information and making sure that the person or people responsible for this senseless act would face consequences. Although Ken's narrative included some insightful details, the attack's true motivation remained a mystery. Detectives looked at a variety of ideas as the investigation went on to try to explain the violent, seemingly random act. They looked at the chances that it was a random act of aggression and the potential that it was a targeted attack with personal motivations. The fact that the incident was committed in a rural area along a lonely route made the investigation much more difficult. It became more challenging to determine if the attackers planned the attack or took advantage of a chance that knocked. The San Bernardino County Sheriff's Office conducted a comprehensive investigation, but they were unable to resolve the issue. The Sheriff's Department's cold case unit persistently pursued new leads in the case over the course of 5 decades, revisiting it on occasion. Nevertheless, time proved to be a powerful foe, and the team was unable to gather any useful information to ultimately solve Daniel Ashton Walker's case. On November 15, 2023, a noteworthy advancement occurred when the cold case team decided to pick up where they left off. In January 2024, they were able to identify the main suspect in the case as the notorious serial killer, 73-year-old Thomas Eugene Creech, thanks to their intensified efforts. Critical information, including verified personal data from Creech's own admissions regarding the killing case, served as the foundation for this breakthrough. The district attorney's offices in San Bernardino County, California, and Ada County, Idaho, worked together to guarantee the accuracy of their conclusions. As a result of Creech's increased cooperation, the San Bernardino County District Attorney's Office was consulted regarding the next steps in Daniel Walker's legal pursuit. Shortly after Daniel's clemency hearing, Thomas Eugene Creech, a convicted offender with a history of repeated confessions, was brought into the case. He is the longest-serving prisoner in Idaho and is scheduled to be put to death for multiple killings. Although he has only been found guilty of 5 crimes, other people think he may be accountable for over 40 separate killings. They think this because he confessed to killing 42 individuals in more than a dozen places in America during his trial in 1975. Authorities have confirmed Creech's claims on Daniel's case, although his public attorney expressed issues regarding the timing of these disclosures. They implied that previous attempts to connect Creech to other killings had been unfounded. Prosecutors in Ada County characterized Creech as a manipulative and unrepentant sociopath, raising the possibility that his latest remarks were a premeditated attempt to evade execution. The seriousness of the matter and Creech's nuanced personality lent even more intrigue to Daniel's quest for justice. San Bernardino County is getting closer to conclusion as Thomas Eugene Creech is named as the main suspect in Daniel Walker's case. Justice in this sad case of needless murder may finally be served after over 50 years, providing some comfort to Daniel's loved ones and the community at large. Doug Walker, Daniel's brother, wrote and self-published Daniel, My Brother, Mystery in the Mojave on Amazon. Doug claimed to have given his brother's character 2 whole chapters in the novel. Daniel's father stated in their final letter to him, "Everyone talks so highly of you, always and without exception. Whether they intend to extradite and prosecute Creech has not yet been made public by the San Bernardino County District Attorney's Office. We have received the complaints and are keeping in touch with the Ada County District Attorney's Office and our San Bernardino County investigative team in order to pursue justice in this case," according to spokeswoman Jacqueline Rodriguez. According to Doug Walker, killing Creech is not always the right kind of justice. He stated, "I don't mind at all if they can show that whoever did it, did it. It is not my decision to determine if they die or not. That's above my salary level." Moving on to the next case. Sandy Charles. Sandy Charles was a Canadian boy born in northern Saskatchewan in 1980. He didn't seem to be particularly strange or out of the ordinary. Even though not much is known about him prior to his crime, it appears that no one believed he was a little child who needed to be taken seriously. That was all before 1995. Sandy was 14 years old when she first saw the 1989 film Warlock and became enthralled with it. According to the 15-rated horror movie, consuming the liquefied fat of an unbaptized child can provide one unique abilities or the ability to fly. Little is known about how Sandy came up with his scheme, but on July 8, 1995, he beat the youngster with a rock and a beer bottle, sliced off strips of his flesh, and then boiled them down. Jonathan George Timpson, who was born on December 30, 1987, was his victim. The 7-year-old, who was described as gregarious and lively, looked up to the masked crusader Zorro. On July 11th, only a few days later, Jonathan's body was discovered. A few hundred yards from his grandmother's house in the woods. He had been slashed across the throat and his head crushed. His skin had been sliced into 10 or 15 sections. William Martin, Sandy's 8-year-old accomplice, was too young to face charges at the time. However, it's unclear how he contributed to the murder. Sandy Charles was found not guilty by reason of insanity in August of 1996, but he was later found guilty as an adult and committed to a mental health facility. It is unknown what evidence brought Sandy Charles to the attention of the police. Sandy had reported to the police that she was having these ideas because there was a spirit in her room. The 14-year-old reportedly considered suicide when a voice suggested that killing someone else could be a better option. A schizophrenia diagnosis was made later on. It became out that Sandy had attempted to break the little boy's neck but had instead smothered him. Jonathan also had a knife stuck in his eye. There is disagreement among sources on Sandy's consumption of the rendered fat that he had removed and cooked from Jonathan's body. He allegedly said that he didn't drink it because he just wanted to remain himself. Sandy, then 17 years old, attacked a jail nurse in June 2000, yet her sentence was limited to 1 day in solitary confinement. He stated in court in 2014 that he wished to reintegrate into society after becoming sufficiently socialized. However, his plea to transfer to a new institute was turned down. Sandy Charles is currently confined to a mental health facility, and it is unlikely that he will be allowed to leave. Moving on to the next case. Rodney Allen Rumsey. On October 6, 1982, about 4:30 a.m., a hiker discovered a man's remains close to Natural Bridges State Park in Santa Cruz County. Investigators found that someone had stolen the unnamed man's life. The case remained unsolved for 41 years until Othram Labs entered into a significant collaboration with a developing forensic-grade genome sequencing company. Othram is the first private lab in North America designed specifically to create human identification using evidence from crime scenes and forensics. They are successfully handling situations similar to this one throughout North America. The California Department of Justice sent Othram an extract of DNA taken from the victim's bones. Othram evaluated the amount of DNA that is actually present on it by performing what is known as a suitability analysis. Othram labs can examine up to 100,000 DNA markers, which facilitates the process of tracing more distant ancestors and reverse engineering back to the immediate family. In this instance, the victim's family was identified through genealogy. The FBI then became involved, and after they had a suspicion as to who it may be, they were able to validate that identity through some fingerprinting. After making that crucial connection, law enforcement was able to identify the body that had been known to detectives for so long as John Doe. The public was informed in October 2023 that the 28-year-old Rodney Allen Rumsey's remains were found there. Upon May 25, 1954, Rodney was born. Sacramento, California was his home. According to Othram Labs' head of account management, Michael Vogon, this began as an unidentified human remains case. Additionally, they are currently looking at a brand new casing. The neighborhood is affected. It affects the detectives. Years of family history, and it feels wonderful. We then celebrated it before moving on to the following one. On Rodney's left forearm, there was a tattoo of a skull and a crimson rose with 3 leaves. The skull included crimson around the eye sockets, 3 red-tipped feathers protruding from the head, and black braids. Investigators still have a lot of work ahead of them, according to Santa Cruz Police spokeswoman Lieutenant Karina Cesena, but they will make an effort to get in touch with Rumsey's family. The Santa Cruz Police Department's investigation unit can be reached at 831-420-5820, and its tip line can be reached at 831-420-595. Moving on to the next case. Craig Price. Youngsters are meant to be carefree and innocent, and tantrums are supposed to be the only way they let out their fury. But there are many of kids out there whose bitterness and fury turn into something far worse: anger. These people's animosity frequently motivates them to carry out and take part in horrifying atrocities. We'll be looking at 3 of these horrifyingly deadly kids in this instance. Price Craig. Craig Chandler. Price, dubbed the Warwick Slasher by the media, killed his first victim when he was just 13 years old. Craig was born in Rhode Island on October 11, 1973, although not much is known about his early years or family. It is known that he had a juvenile record from an early age, with charges of drug use, assault, robbery, and stalking. No one thought the young child would kill himself, even with his dubious criminal history. Craig broke into Rebecca Spencer's 27-year-old home on July 27, 1987, a woman who was located directly next door to him. Using a kitchen knife, he stabbed her 58 times. Then, on September 1, 1989, at the age of 15, Craig broke into the 39-year-old Joan Heaton's house, where she lived with her 2 daughters, with the intention of robbing the place. He stabbed Joan 57 times while high on marijuana and LSD. Then he stabbed Jennifer, her 10-year-old daughter, 62 times, 30 times with her 8-year-old daughter, Melissa. Craig also ground Melissa to a powder with a kitchen stool, breaking her skull. He even gave one of the girls and Joan a bite. Because of how violently Craig attacked the family, the knife blades he used separated from the handles and remained inside the victims' bodies. Craig's juvenile background and proximity to both crime scenes notwithstanding, authorities did not view him as a suspect until the FBI connected the 2 crimes, claiming that he was hurt in the battle and that they were probably committed by a neighbor. When 2 police officers interrogated the 15-year-old on September 5, 1989, they observed the cut on his hand. Craig admitted to police that he'd sliced it when intoxicated. He subsequently failed a polygraph examination. Police were able to obtain a search warrant for his residence because of this suspicious combination of items, and they discovered knives and bloody clothing inside. It is reported that Craig had a calm tone and manner when he was discovered. Without any more prodding, he confessed, and the police reported that his admission lacked regret. Even worse, while he admitted to the atrocities, he continued to imitate the sounds made by his victims as they were dying. Craig thinks that part of the reason behind the killings is his early exposure to racist messages. 1 month prior to turning 16, he was incarcerated and boasted that upon his release, he would create history, given that he would be released at age 21 after being tried and found guilty as a minor. Later, the Craig Price case changed the law to permit charging minors as adults. However, this could not be implemented in the past. Considering the severity of the act, citizens of Rhode Island organized to advocate for Craig Price's imprisonment. Numerous state psychologists concurred that Craig was not a good fit for treatment. Craig has been charged with numerous other crimes while he is incarcerated. Criminal disdain for declining to undergo a psychological assessment, threatening a correctional officer and receiving extortion, assault and probation violation due to fights he took engaged in while incarcerated. Craig Price never experienced freedom on his 21st birthday as a result of these offenses. He was originally scheduled for release in 2022 following his 2009 parole denial. However, he was charged with stabbing another prisoner with a 5-inch handmade knife in April 2017. Additionally, on January 18, 2019, he received a second sentence of 25 years in prison. At 46 years old, Rhode Islanders can finally sleep well, knowing that the Warwick slasher will spend the remainder of his life behind bars. Moving on to the next case. Richie Edwards. Richie Edwards was born in Wales on December 22, 1967. He became a member of the Manic Street Preachers. Before being approved as a fourth member, Richie served as their driver. A journalist questioned Richie on May 15, 1991, on the band's sincerity and morals. In response, Richie used a razor blade to actually carve the words into his arm. He was upfront about his self-harming and suffered from acute depression. 2 weeks before to his disappearance, he began to gradually remove every penny from his bank account. Novel with Cocaine is a novel he handed to one of his pals the night before he vanished. He advised his companion to go through the opening. The book's introduction describes the life of a person who disappears, and Richie did just that on February 1, 1995. He disappeared. Though it's unlikely that he chose to take his own life, all the signs point to him departing voluntarily.
Moving on to the next case.
Caitlin Markham. 2 years after Caitlin Markham, 22, vanished, her skeletal remains were discovered in a forested spot in rural Cedar Grove, Indiana, some 30 miles from her Fairfield residence. After initially scratching their heads over what might have happened to her, authorities started to investigate Caitlin Markham's killer. Over the years, investigators pursued every clue in an attempt to unravel the mystery surrounding her murder. After a 12-year investigation, the murderer of Caitlin Markham has finally been apprehended and the case closed. On August 16, 1990, Caitlin Helene Markham was born in Hamilton County, Ohio. Caitlin Markham's vivacious demeanor would always brighten any space when she was little. Her relatives said she was a loving, kind light who cared for others. Allie, her younger sister, stated in a documentary about her passing, "Caitlin always took care of me." Family and friends compared her to a butterfly because of her vivacious and carefree personality. She loved all things artistic growing up. Before attending college, Caitlin had her entire life mapped out. She was engaged to be married at the age of 22, and she was finishing up her undergraduate studies at the Art Institute of Cincinnati in Ohio. Caitlin worked 2 jobs while saving money to move to Colorado with her fiancé right after marriage. She worked at David's Bridal and at the bookshop on campus. Sadly, tragedy struck just 2 days before her 22nd birthday, meaning that her promising future would not last. On August 13, 2011, at approximately 9 o'clock at night, Caitlin Markham left her job at the Bridal Boutique and made her way to her Fairfield apartment. Once she arrived home, she saw her fiancé, John Carter, who was waiting for her. Later on in the evening, Caitlin's friend stopped over to spend time with the pair. Before we continue, we want to remind you that only a small percentage of people who watch our videos are actually subscribed. So if you enjoy our content, consider subscribing. It's free and you can always change your mind later. Now, let's move on with the video. However, she ultimately left when she became aware of the tension between John and Caitlin. Caitlin appeared to be silent, as the buddy noted. She questioned John about the odd behavior of the couple. John added that it was because he and Caitlin had used magic mushrooms. John Carter claims that he left Caitlin's condo later that night to go to a bonfire at 11 o'clock with some pals. It was believed that Caitlin Markham, who remained at home, was displeased with John Carter for going. Caitlin Markham had inexplicably disappeared from her residence overnight, leaving no trace by the next day. John Carter called 911 at around 8 p.m. and reported his fiance's disappearance after stopping over to see how she was doing because he hadn't heard from her in a while. John Carter said, "My fiance is missing." Overheard, "I'm having trouble finding her. I saw her yesterday night about 12 o'clock. I'm very anxious because she lives alone in a house. Her vehicle is still there. Her car was still at her house when I decided to drop by and check on her after attempting to reach her for a while. She would have her car at work right now, which is why I'm so freaked out." Following that, Fairfield police officers started looking into the matter and following clues related to Caitlin Markham's disappearance. Family, friends, and concerned citizens came out in force a few days after Caitlin Markham vanished, offering to help look for her near her house. She worked at the Tri-County Mall, the Art Institute, and her neighborhood in Fairfield. However, hours became days, days became months, and months became years. No trace of Caitlin Markham could be found. Carter said that she sent a final text in the wee hours of August 14, 2011 at 12:52 a.m. according to cell phone data. Investigators have not discovered any indications of credit card or cell phone activity since that point in time. Her friends and family were the initial group of suspects. The investigators questioned John Carter about the night he last saw her because he was the last person to see her alive. John admitted to the cops that he had not spoken to Caitlin since the night of the bonfire. He said, just before 1 in the morning, Caitlin had texted him a picture of her boss that she thought was cute. When questioned by investigators about his whereabouts following the blaze, he replied that, at approximately 4 in the morning, he walked to his mother's house and dozed off. He claimed that he texted Caitlin Markham a good morning the following day, but he never heard back. Carter reported that by midday she still hadn't responded to his SMS, in contrast to Caitlin. John claimed not to have heard from her by day's end. He decided to visit her apartment to see how his fiancée was doing after growing concerned. He said her car was in the driveway when he arrived at her residence. Caitlin was nowhere to be seen, but her dog was inside. He said, "Not at all," in response to the question of whether he and Caitlin had been experiencing problems in their relationship. But Michelle, Caitlin's companion, encountered something different from this. In fact, 2 days prior to Caitlin's disappearance, Michelle had disclosed to the public that she and John had a rather intense dispute. Michelle claims that on August 12, 2011, there was a dispute between John and Caitlin regarding money. That evening, the couple, who didn't get along, went to a festival at a local church. Michelle claims that John and Caitlin's argument overflowed onto the occasion. Ultimately, Caitlin lost her cool and made the decision to depart the festival early. Another possibility is that Caitlin made up with John before she vanished. However, as was already said, there seemed to be some tension between the pair the following evening as well. A buddy, sensing that the pair would have chosen to be alone, decided to depart Caitlin's condo. At the time, a lot of people, including Caitlin's family, thought John Carter was connected to her abduction. They rejected the assertion made by John Carter that Caitlin and him had used magic mushrooms, which was the reason for Caitlin's gloomy and unusually quiet conduct on the evening her buddy arrived. They reasoned that even if Caitlin had taken the mushrooms as soon as she entered her apartment, it is unlikely that she would feel their effects so quickly, especially because the friend arrived around 15 minutes after Caitlin arrived home from work. On the other hand, some have questioned if Caitlin ever ate the mushrooms at all. If all she wanted to do was unwind at home after a demanding workday, it seemed strange that she would want to feel the effects of mushrooms. She was tired, having just gotten home. Another strange aspect of John's story that a few people found odd was the bonfire. John stated that he went to meet up with friends after leaving Caitlin's condo on August 13th at approximately 11 p.m. He planned to burn Caitlin's paperwork in the bag he carried with him at the bonfire. John explained that Caitlin didn't have a shredder and that she preferred to destroy the documents rather than throw them away. Instead, he seized the documents with the intention of destroying them to ease her mind. However, some believe that this is an odd explanation for his decision to trash Caitlin's records. It didn't seem like too much of a stretch at first. He told the detectives he often conducted errands for Caitlin, so it's likely that he was actually doing her a favor by taking the documents out of her home. But generally speaking, some have doubted John's alibi. Several of the friends John said he was with that night have given conflicting stories. Although there was a lot of conjecture about John, some people even claim that there wasn't even a bonfire that evening. It appears that the investigation's focus eventually changed. Over the years, John Carter has addressed Caitlin's situation in the media on multiple occasions, and he has persisted in his denial of any involvement in her disappearance. 3 days after Caitlin vanished on August 16, 2011, John Carter spoke of being terrified and worried during one of his fiance's searches. He said it this way: "I'm scared. I'm utterly afraid. All I want to do is find Caitlin, spend her birthday with her, and go to Red Lobster the way she had intended." Later on, he said that in the worst situation, Caitlin is a tough person who would battle her way out. But after several days, Caitlin was nowhere to be discovered, so the search for her was called off. After almost 2 years of no progress, the case was revived on April 7, 2013, when a couple purportedly searching for scrap metal discovered what looked to be a grocery bag holding a human jaw and a skull with hair still attached. The pair would give 911 a call right away. Wanda Lee examined dental data to identify the victim's remains and ultimately determined that they belonged to Caitlin Markham, the coroner for Franklin County, Indiana. At that point, her death was declared a homicide, but the cause of death remained unknown. Her family was understandably heartbroken to learn that she had been the victim of a homicide when word of her death reached them. The news did not particularly surprise them either. When she first vanished, her family clung to the hope that she would be discovered safely. Weeks passed into months without her, and their hopes dimmed. After some time, they concluded that Caitlin had been killed. At one of Caitlin Markham's favorite locations, Harbin Park, her family and friends come together to celebrate her life on April 18, 2013. Her Alma school, Fairfield High School, hosted her burial 4 months later on August 25, 2013. She would have adored the way the space was arranged, with lots of vibrant colors. John Carter, her fiancé, was moved to tears as he addressed the assembly and referred to Caitlin as the love of his life. "Our kiss would have been shared. Our marriage would have taken place. Our honeymoon would have taken place. Our child would have been born." John Carter remarked, "We would have had our life and grown old together." Following the discovery of Caitlin Markham's remains in Indiana, the Indiana State Police became involved in the inquiry. Caitlin Markham's family also engaged a private investigator to look into the matter in the years after her bones were discovered. Caitlin's family apparently believed insufficient resources were being used in the wake of her death, despite the fact that the Indiana State Police and Fairfield Police had launched investigations into the incident. Over time, the Caitlin Markham case developed to become nationally recognized. A documentary was produced in her honor to commemorate her life in 2016. The 1-hour documentary, taken too soon, The Caitlin Markham Story, included her family and friends. Additionally, the documentary was seen on Crime Watch Daily, a syndicated television program. The documentary's premiere was witnessed by Caitlin Markham's family and friends in a movie theater in Springdale, Ohio, on her 27th birthday. Her family persisted in holding out hope that the documentary would provide insight into their daughter's murder. What happened to Caitlin Markham has been the subject of numerous rumors and theories over the years, some of which have been stoked by social media. According to one scenario, she overdosed on drugs and died, which caused her loved ones to worry. They took her body to Indiana and dumped it on a Franklin County country road. According to some claims, her fiancé, John Carter, and other family members and friends are to blame for her passing. Following extensive research, the sheriff's detective declared that a suspect was in the case, but they did not provide a name. But Michael Strauss's arrest and his prior life raised questions at the time regarding Caitlin Markham's unresolved homicide. Authorities claim Michael Strauss killed 23-year-old Ellen Week at his Liberty Township home. Michael Strauss faced charges of murder subsequent to the discovery of Ellen Week's body in a field on Milliken Road. Similar to Caitlin, Ellen Week was also said to have vanished from her house. At the time, there were pictures of Michael Strauss, Caitlin Markham, and other friends that had been posted online, making him a suspect in Caitlin Markham's case. These images seem to indicate that Michael Strauss knew Caitlin Markham. As the investigation goes on, Michael Strauss remains unidentified as the murderer of Caitlin Markham. After all leads were exhausted, the prize for information that resulted in the killer of Caitlin Markham's arrest and conviction was increased over time to $100,000. However, her case went unresolved for more than 10 years, despite numerous law enforcement authorities looking into it. But things seemed to change on February 17, 2023, when investigators detained Jonathan Palmerton, John Carter's boyhood pal and a close friend of Caitlin Markham. Prosecutors claim that Jonathan lied in an interview in April 2022 while being questioned about Caitlin Markham's cold case, leading to his arrest at work. A warrant was filed for his residence following a search. Some incriminating evidence that suggested he had lied in relation to Caitlin's murder was found by investigators. Later on, he was accused of crime and perjury. A $50,000 bond was established. Although Palmerton's arrest gives Markham's father hope, he is nonetheless cautious while the issue is being handled. John Carter, the fiancé of Caitlin Markham, was detained at his place of employment as a suspect in her death, 1 month after Jonathan Palmerton was taken into custody on charges of perjury. During a search, investigators disclosed finding proof of his guilt at his Fairfield residence. These facts pointed to John Carter as the person they should be looking for. In court, John Carter entered a not guilty plea. But Butler County Prosecutor Mike Gamoser provided fresh information on Caitlin's body's finding in court. He stated that Caitlin's left wrist had 3 or 4 deep force wounds. The location of Caitlin Markham's body's final discovery, as per the forensic report, is most likely not the original one. In the course of the high bond debate, G.M. Moser recited passages he claimed investigators discovered during a recent search warrant inside the mother's house of John Carter. When Caitlin passed away, John Carter was residing in his mother's house. Somewhere in one of the writings it states, "Deep down, I love her. You want to kill her, but I love her. She must die. I can't kill her. Yes, you can. No. Yes. How do you talk me into all these things? I'm just that good. But you're bad, I know. How do I kill you? You can't. You're right. About what? Nothing. You're accurate. Regarding what? Nothing." John Carter appeared to be battling and interacting with a demon. According to other court-revealed records, John Carter battles depression and PTSD. John Carter was given a $1,000 bond, but on April 4, 2023, he posted it. He posted a $1,000 cash bond and appeared in court with only an ankle monitor on. He could now stand before the judge unrestrained. He will not be imprisoned until June 2024, when his trial is scheduled to take place. Dave Markham, Caitlin's father, stated following John Carter's arrest that it is not surprising. "To be honest, I had suspicions about him from the beginning. I believe that many, if not the great majority of people, had suspicions about him. Dave believes that with John Carter's apprehension, he and Allie would at last receive justice for the deaths of their sister and daughter." Thanks for watching.